The snow crunched under Maya's boots as she approached the weathered cabin, her breath forming clouds in the bitter mountain air. 8 months pregnant and down to her last $20, this inheritance from a grandmother she'd never met felt like divine intervention. But as she pushed open the creaking door, something felt terrifyingly wrong. The hinges groaned like wounded animals, and the sound echoed across the empty mountainside behind her. Maya paused on the threshold, one hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly as her investigative instincts, dormant for months but never truly dead, began to stir. The cabin smelled wrong, not just musty or abandoned, but metallic, like old pennies left in the rain. Her grandmother, Evelyn Winters, had supposedly died alone up here 3 months ago. The lawyer had been vague about the details, mentioning only that Maya was the sole beneficiary of a woman she'd never known existed, until the certified letter arrived at her cramped studio apartment in Denver. Her mother had never spoken of having family, had always claimed they were alone in the world. Maya stepped inside, her journalist's eye automatically cataloguing details. The furniture was sparse but well maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold ashes scattered on the hearth. Canned goods lined makeshift shelves, enough to last months. But it was the wooden beams overhead that made her blood run cold. Symbols were carved deep into the wood, not random scratches, but deliberate markings that seemed to follow a pattern. Circles intersected with lines, crescents nestled inside triangles, and something that looked disturbingly like a family tree with branches that ended in what could only be dates. Maya recognized the methodical precision from her days, investigating cult activities for the Denver Post. Someone had spent considerable time documenting something up here. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her tension. Maya rubbed her stomach absently, trying to calm both herself and her unborn daughter. She'd come here to escape, to hide until she figured out her next move. The story that had ended her career, a pharmaceutical company conducting illegal trials on pregnant women, had left her with a target on her back and no one willing to hire a whistleblower. She moved deeper into the cabin, noting how the floorboards creaked unevenly beneath her feet. Her training had taught her to notice structural inconsistencies, and something about the sound was off. Near the back wall, she knelt awkwardly, running her hands along the wood grain. There, a section that didn't quite match the others. The boards were newer, fitted together with slightly different spacing. Maya's pulse quickened as she found the almost invisible hinges, a trap door, expertly concealed but not quite perfect. Her fingers traced the edges until she located the catch. The section lifted with surprising ease, revealing a ladder descending into darkness below. Cold air rushed up from the opening, carrying scents that made her stomach lurch. Not decay exactly, but something preserved, artificial. Maya hesitated. Every rational part of her mind screamed to close the trapdoor, pack her meager belongings, and leave this place immediately. But the journalist in her, the part that had driven her to pursue stories others wouldn't touch, demanded answers. Why had her grandmother lived in isolation up here? Why had Maya's mother never mentioned having family? And why did everything about this inheritance feel orchestrated? She lowered herself carefully onto the ladder, her pregnancy making the descent clumsy and precarious. The space below was larger than expected, clearly excavated and reinforced. Emergency lighting flickered on as her feet touched the floor, motion sensors still functional despite the cabin's apparent abandonment. Filing cabinets lined the walls, their metal surfaces gleaming under the harsh fluorescent bulbs. A desk sat in the center, papers scattered across its surface as if recently abandoned. But it was the photographs, covering one entire wall, that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. Dozens of women stared back at her, all bearing an unmistakable family resemblance. High cheekbones, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Some photos were recent, others clearly decades old. Each was labeled with dates and locations, creating a timeline that stretched back nearly a century. Maya approached the wall with trembling steps, her eyes scanning the faces until she found her own mother's photograph among them. Younger, maybe 18, with a date from 28 years ago. Below it, in careful handwriting, Subject 47, trial terminated, subject relocated. Her hands shook as she reached for a thick folder marked with the current year. Inside were medical records, genealogical charts, and correspondence with organizations she didn't recognize. But it was the letterhead that made her knees buckle, Meridian Pharmaceutical, the same company whose illegal pregnancy trials had destroyed her career. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maya realized with dawning horror that her arrival here wasn't coincidence. Someone had been watching, waiting, guiding her to this moment. Her inheritance wasn't salvation, it was the next phase of an experiment that had been running for generations. The morning light streaming through the grimy windows revealed just how much work the cabin would need. Maya wrapped her grandmother's moth-eaten quilt tighter around her shoulders and surveyed the chaos. Dust motes danced in the golden beams, highlighting water stains on the walls and the warped floorboards that creaked with every step. She'd barely slept, her mind churning over the phone call that had driven her here, her mother's voice brittle with desperation. "The medical bills are going to bankrupt us, Maya. Your father's treatments, we might lose the house." 26 years old with a liberal arts degree and a string of dead-end jobs behind her, Maya had nothing to offer except this, a cabin she'd inherited from a grandmother who'd been nothing more than a name whispered in hushed family conversations. Her phone showed no signal bars. The isolation that had seemed like a blessing yesterday now felt suffocating. Maya pushed open the front door, inhaling the crisp mountain air, and began carrying in the supplies she'd loaded into her ancient Honda. Cleaning products, basic tools, enough canned food to last a week. Her plan was simple: clean the place up, assess its value, and sell it quickly. Even a remote mountain cabin had to be worth something. The kitchen was a time capsule from the 1950s, complete with a cast-iron stove and a hand pump at the sink. Maya tested the pump and was surprised when clear water gushed out. At least the well still worked. She began in the main room, sweeping decades of debris toward the door. Dead leaves, mouse droppings, fragments of broken pottery that might have once been her grandmother's dishes. As she worked, Maya tried to piece together what little she knew about Elena Vasquez. Her father had mentioned that Elena had been some kind of midwife or folk healer, someone the local mountain communities had both revered and feared. There had been a falling out. Maya's grandfather had forbidden any contact when Maya's father was still young. The details had died with her grandfather, leaving only fragments and silence. The floorboards groaned ominously as Maya dragged a broken chair toward the door. One board near the fireplace sagged more than the others, and when she stepped on it, the wood gave slightly. She knelt and examined it more closely. The nails were loose, and the board was shorter than the others, almost as if it had been cut. Maya found a screwdriver in her toolkit and worked at the nails. They came up easily, too easily. The board lifted to reveal a gap, and beneath it, another board running perpendicular. Her pulse quickened. She pried up the second board, then a third, until she'd created an opening large enough to peer through. A wooden ladder disappeared into darkness below. Maya's hands trembled as she retrieved her phone's flashlight. The weak beam revealed a small underground room, maybe 8 feet square, with stone walls and a dirt floor. The air that drifted up smelled of earth and something else, something medicinal and strange. She tested the ladder's stability before climbing down. The rungs held, though they creaked with age. Her feet touched solid ground, and she swept the phone's light around the space. The room was clearly intentional, not just a root cellar. Shelves lined the walls, filled with glass jars whose contents were impossible to identify in the dim light. A wooden table dominated the center, its surface scarred and stained. Papers were scattered across it, covered in handwriting that looked like Spanish mixed with symbols Maya didn't recognize. She moved closer to the table, her light revealing sketches of plants, anatomical drawings, and what looked like family trees with names and dates going back generations. Her own last name, Reeves, appeared on several documents, connected by lines to other names, other dates. Her grandmother's spidery handwriting filled the margins with notes in multiple languages. Maya's light caught something that made her breath catch. A photograph, old and sepia-toned, showed a woman who looked remarkably like Maya's own reflection. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn jawline. But the clothing was wrong. The hairstyle belonged to the 1920s or earlier. On the back, someone had written Maria Elena Vasquez, 1923. Not her grandmother. Her grandmother's mother, maybe, or aunt. But the resemblance was uncanny. Maya photographed everything she could, her phone's battery dropping steadily. There were more documents than she could process, land deeds, birth certificates, what looked like medical records, and everywhere, that strange symbol, a circle with a tree inside it, roots extending downward, branches reaching up. When her phone battery hit 15%, Maya reluctantly climbed back up. She replaced the floorboards carefully, making sure they looked undisturbed. But as she worked, one thought echoed in her mind. Her grandmother hadn't just been a folk healer. She'd been documenting something, preserving something. And somehow, Maya was connected to it all. The cabin suddenly felt less like a burden and more like a puzzle she was meant to solve. Maya's hands trembled as she pried up the third floorboard, the wood groaning in protest after decades of silence. The beam from her phone's flashlight cut through the darkness below, revealing what looked like a narrow chamber carved directly into the mountain bedrock beneath the cabin's foundation. The smell hit her first, musty paper and something metallic that made her stomach clench. She'd expected maybe old storage, perhaps remnants of moonshine operations that were common in these mountains during Prohibition. What she found instead defied explanation. Lowering herself through the opening, Maya's feet touched cold stone. The chamber was larger than it appeared from above, stretching back into shadows that her light couldn't penetrate. Along the walls, wooden shelves held dozens of leather-bound journals, their spines cracked with age. But it was the table in the center that made her breath catch. Maps covered its surface, held down by stones at each corner. Not tourist maps or geological surveys, but hand-drawn charts marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Red ink traced routes through mountain passes, with dates scrawled in margins going back decades. Some were recent, within the last 5 years. Maya picked up the nearest journal, its leather binding soft with age. The first page bore her grandmother's unmistakable handwriting, Elena Vasquez, 1987. If something happens to me, Maya must know the truth. Her legs gave out. Maya sank onto a wooden crate, the journal clutched against her chest. Her grandmother had known she would come here, had planned for it even. The Cortez family has protected the mountain passages for 4 generations. The first entry began. What the government calls smuggling, we call survival. What they call criminal, we call necessary. Page after page detailed a network Maya never knew existed. Her grandmother hadn't been the simple farmer Maya remembered from childhood visits. Elena had been the matriarch of an operation that moved people across borders, through mountain routes that bypassed official checkpoints. Not drugs or weapons, people. Families fleeing violence, children separated from parents, individuals whose only crime was seeking safety. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from David. Bank called again. We have 48 hours before foreclosure proceedings begin. She stared at the message, then at the journal in her hands. 48 hours to save everything her father had built, everything that kept her brother's medical bills from drowning them all. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come here to escape her problems, only to discover her grandmother had spent decades solving other people's. Another journal caught her eye, this one more recent. Maya recognized some of the handwriting as her cousin Roberto's. The entries spoke of increased border patrol activity, new technology making traditional routes dangerous, the need for innovation. The final entry, dated just 3 months ago, made her blood run cold. Government knows about the Northern Trail. Someone talked. Have to assume the worst. They're coming for all of us, moving the operation deep underground until we know who we can trust. Maya heard it then, the distant rumble of vehicles climbing the mountain road. Her first instinct was relief. Maybe it was Roberto or another family member who could explain everything. But something in the journal's urgent tone made her kill her flashlight and listen more carefully. Multiple engines, moving slow, deliberate, not the casual approach of family. She scrambled up through the floor opening, pulling the boards back into place as quietly as possible. Through the cabin's grimy windows, she watched headlights wind up the mountain trail. 3, maybe 4 vehicles, still distant but approaching steadily. Maya's mind raced through possibilities. Could be park rangers, local police, or something worse. The journals made clear that the family operation had enemies in multiple agencies. If they'd connected her to this place... She grabbed the most recent journal and stuffed it into her backpack, along with one of the hand-drawn maps. Whatever was in that chamber, whatever her family had been involved in, she needed to understand it before anyone else arrived. The cabin had a back door leading to the tree line. Maya slipped out into the cold mountain air, grateful for the overcast sky that hid the moon. She'd grown up hiking these trails with her father. Muscle memory guided her feet along the familiar paths even in darkness. Behind her, the vehicles drew closer. Maya counted at least 3 sets of headlights now, moving with the systematic precision of a coordinated search. They weren't coming for a social visit. She found a hiding spot among the boulders 50 yards from the cabin, close enough to observe but screened by pine trees. From here she could see anyone who approached the front entrance, and the back exit route remained clear if she needed to run. The first vehicle came into view, a black SUV with government plates. 2 more followed, disgorging figures in tactical gear who moved with military precision around the cabin's perimeter. Maya clutched the stolen journal tighter, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. Maya must know the truth. Whatever that truth was, people were willing to kill for it. The floorboard creaked ominously beneath Maya's weight as she knelt in the cabin's main room, running her fingers along the wooden planks. What had seemed like ordinary settling sounds now felt deliberate, almost beckoning. She pressed harder against the loose board, and it gave way with a soft groan. Her heart hammered as she pried at the edges with her fingernails, then searched frantically for something to leverage it open. The rusty poker by the fireplace worked perfectly, sliding into the gap with satisfying precision. The board lifted to reveal a dark rectangular void beneath. Maya fumbled for her phone's flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the darkness below. What she saw made her breath catch. This wasn't just empty space between floor joists. Someone had deliberately carved out a hiding place. The smooth walls and careful construction spoke of intention, of secrets meant to be preserved. She lowered herself through the opening, her feet finding solid ground about 4 feet down. The hidden room was larger than the opening suggested, extending beneath what must be half the cabin's foundation. The air smelled of cedar and something else, something metallic that made her nose wrinkle. Wooden shelves lined the walls, laden with objects that her phone's light revealed in fragments. Mason jars filled with what looked like herbs and dried plants, leather-bound journals stacked in precise towers, and photographs, dozens of them, some framed, others loose in yellowed envelopes. Maya grabbed the nearest stack of photos, her hands trembling as she shuffled through them. The faces staring back were hauntingly familiar. Her grandmother Elena as a young woman, but not in any pictures Maya had ever seen. These showed Elena with people Maya didn't recognize, men and women with sharp eyes and serious expressions, all gathered around what appeared to be some kind of ceremony. One photo made her stomach lurch. Elena stood beside a man who looked exactly like Maya's father, but the clothing and photo quality suggested it was taken decades before he was born. The resemblance was uncanny. The same dark eyes, the same angular jawline, even the same scar above the left eyebrow that her father claimed came from a childhood accident. She set the photos aside and reached for one of the journals. The leather binding cracked as she opened it, releasing the scent of old paper and ink. Elena's handwriting filled the pages in neat, precise rows, but the language wasn't English. Some words looked familiar, Spanish maybe, or something close to it, but others were completely foreign. Maya flipped through page after page, growing more frustrated. Why hide journals written in a language she couldn't understand? She was about to close the book when a loose page fluttered to the ground. This one was in English, written in the same careful script. "The bloodline must be protected," it read. "Each generation carries the burden and the gift. Maya will need to understand when the time comes. The others are getting closer, and David's disappearance proves they know about us. If something happens to me, she must be prepared." Maya's vision blurred. David, her father's name. Her father, who had vanished without a trace 3 months ago, leaving behind only debts and questions. The police had given up, assuming he'd simply run away from his gambling problems, but this suggested something far more sinister. She grabbed more journals, searching desperately for English passages. Most were in that strange hybrid language, but she found fragments here and there. References to the gift appeared repeatedly, along with mentions of names she didn't recognize. One entry made her blood run cold. They found the Castellanos family in Arizona. All of them, even the children. Their blood was too strong to hide. "We must be more careful." A sound from above made her freeze. Footsteps on the cabin's front porch, deliberate and heavy. Maya quickly stuffed several journals and photographs into her jacket, her movements frantic. The footsteps moved around the perimeter of the cabin, as if someone was checking for entry points. She clicked off her phone's light and held her breath. Through the floorboards, she could hear the front door rattling, someone testing the lock. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The doorknob turned. Maya pressed herself against the hidden room's wall, clutching the stolen documents. Above her, floorboards creaked under careful footsteps. Whoever had entered was moving slowly, systematically searching. They knew exactly where they were going. The footsteps stopped directly above her hiding spot. Maya bit her lip to keep from whimpering as a thin beam of light filtered down through the cracks between the floorboards. They had a flashlight too, and they were looking for something specific. A voice spoke, low and gravelly. "She's been here. The dust patterns are wrong." Another voice responded, "This one female and coldly professional. Check everything. If Elena left anything behind, we need to find it before the girl does." Maya's chest constricted. They knew about her. They knew about Elena, and they were looking for exactly what she had just found. Maya's hands trembled as she lifted the heavy wooden panel, revealing a narrow staircase descending into complete darkness. The musty scent of earth and old wood wafted up from below, carrying with it something else, a metallic tang that made her stomach clench. She grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter, its beam cutting through the shadows like a knife through black velvet. Each step creaked under her weight as she descended, the walls pressing closer with every footfall. The basement wasn't large, maybe 8 feet by 10, but it felt vast in its implications. Her flashlight swept across stone walls lined with wooden shelves, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. The shelves held dozens of glass jars, each one filled with dark liquid that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Labels written in her grandmother's spidery handwriting adorned each container, but the words were in a language Maya didn't recognize. Between the jars sat leather-bound journals, their spines cracked and worn from age and handling. In the center of the room stood a wooden table, its surface stained dark with what looked like decades of use. Carved symbols covered every inch of the wood, spirals and crescents intertwined with shapes that hurt to look at directly. Maya forced herself to step closer, her flashlight beam dancing across the intricate patterns. A thick journal lay open on the table, its pages yellowed and brittle. Maya leaned in, squinting at the cramped handwriting that filled every line. This, at least, was in English, though the words themselves made little sense. "The third generation bears the strongest burden," she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper in the oppressive silence. "Sarah shows the signs earlier than expected. The hunger comes for her as it came for me, as it came for my mother before me. The bloodline cannot be broken, only managed." Sarah Maya's mother's name was Sarah. Her hands shaking, Maya flipped back through the pages, scanning for more references. Entry after entry detailed observations about her mother's childhood, strange incidents that Maya had always attributed to her mother's difficult personality, the way animals would flee from Sarah's presence, how plants would wither in the garden despite her grandmother's careful tending, the night terrors that left Sarah screaming about shadows with teeth. The herbs help, another entry read. A daily dose in her morning tea keeps the worst of it at bay. But she's growing stronger, and I fear what will happen when she reaches womanhood. The family curse strengthens with each generation. What took decades to manifest in me appeared in months with Sarah. Maya's legs gave out, and she sank onto a wooden stool beside the table. Family curse. The words swam before her eyes as pieces of her childhood began clicking into place. Her mother's explosive rages that seemed to come from nowhere, the way she would sometimes stare at Maya with eyes that looked hungry, the strict rules about certain foods, certain places, certain people Maya was never allowed to be around. She flipped forward in the journal, searching for more recent entries. The handwriting grew shakier as the years progressed, and the content grew darker. Sarah refuses to acknowledge what she is. Read an entry dated just 3 years ago. She's cut all contact, taken Maya far from here. She thinks distance will protect the child, but blood calls to blood. The hunger will find Maya eventually. It always does. The next entry made Maya's blood freeze. Maya is 23 now. The signs should have started by 18 at the latest. Perhaps Sarah's denial has weakened the bloodline. Or perhaps the entry trailed off, unfinished. Maya flipped to the final entry, dated just 6 months before her grandmother's death. I see her in my dreams now, Maya. She's coming here, drawn by something she doesn't understand. The cabin calls to our kind when the time comes. I won't be here to guide her, but perhaps that's for the best. The truth is here, waiting. She'll have to choose what to do with it. The flashlight flickered, casting wild shadows across the walls. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood, scanning the shelves with new understanding. This wasn't just a basement, it was a laboratory, a place where her grandmother had spent decades researching their family's dark inheritance. She pulled one of the jars from the shelf, holding it up to the light. The liquid inside was thick and dark, almost black. The label read simply, "For the hunger. 3 drops at sunset." A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps, heavy ones, crossing the floor above her head. Maya's mind raced. She was certain she had locked the front door. The footsteps paused directly above the hidden entrance to the basement. Maya clicked off the flashlight and pressed herself against the stone wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure whoever was upstairs would hear it. The journal in her hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, filled with secrets that changed everything she thought she knew about herself and her family. The footsteps began moving again, slow and deliberate, as if searching for something, or someone. The morning light filtered through the cabin's grimy windows. As Maya descended into the hidden room once more, her grandmother's journal clutched against her chest. Sleep had eluded her through the night, her mind churning with questions about the Ashworth family and what connection they might have to her own bloodline. She'd memorized every visible word on the damaged pages, but in daylight she hoped to decipher more of the water-stained entries. Settling cross-legged on the wooden floor beside the metal box, she opened the journal carefully and began reading aloud, as if hearing the words might unlock their meaning. The Ashworth girl came again today. She grows stronger, but the burden weighs heavily on her shoulders. I fear what Margaret has told her, and what she hasn't. Maya paused, running her finger over a section where the ink had bled beyond recognition. The bloodline cannot be broken, but it can be redirected. Maya flipped through more pages, searching for any mention of her mother's name or her own family. Most entries focused on herb preparations, weather patterns, and cryptic references to the others who came before. But near the back of the journal, she found something that made her breath catch. Little Maya visits in my dreams now, Elena's daughter, so far from home, carrying the weight without knowing it. The gift skips generations sometimes. Elena was spared, but the child, The child will need to choose. The words seemed to pulse on the page. Maya read them again, her hands trembling. Her grandmother had written about her specifically, had somehow known she would face some kind of choice. But what choice? And what gift? A sound from above made her freeze. Footsteps on the cabin's front porch, slow and deliberate. Maya quickly closed the journal and crept toward the ladder, listening. The footsteps circled the cabin's perimeter, pausing at each window. "I know you're in there." The voice was female, older, carrying an authority that made Maya's skin prickle. "Found your car on the old logging road. Elena's girl, aren't you?" Maya climbed halfway up the ladder, her heart hammering. Through a gap in the floorboards, she could see a shadow moving past the windows. The woman knew her mother's name. "No need to hide, child. I knew your grandmother well. Name's Cordelia Ashworth." The name from the journal. Maya's grip tightened on the ladder rungs. After a long moment, she climbed the rest of the way up and approached the front door cautiously. Through the window, she could see a woman in her 70s, with steel-grey hair pulled back severely and sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore a heavy wool coat despite the mild weather and carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Maya opened the door slowly, keeping one hand on the frame. "How did you know I was here?" "The mountain tells its secrets to those who know how to listen." Cordelia's gaze moved past Maya into the cabin's interior. "May I come in? We have much to discuss and little time to waste." "I don't know you. But I know you. Knew you before you were born, just as your grandmother did." Cordelia stepped closer, and Maya caught the scent of pine and something else, something medicinal and sharp. "The dreams started 3 nights ago, didn't they? The ones where you're standing in a circle of stones and something is calling your name?" Maya's blood turned cold. She had experienced exactly that dream, though she hadn't remembered it clearly until Cordelia spoke the words. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I've been having the same dreams for 60 years, waiting for Elena's daughter to come home." Cordelia's expression softened slightly. "Your grandmother asked me to watch for you, to help you understand what's happening before it's too late." "Too late for what?" "The awakening. It happens differently for everyone in the bloodline, but it always happens eventually, usually triggered by stress, by desperation, by being pushed to the very edge of what you think you can handle." Cordelia studied Maya's face carefully. "You're running from something that made you desperate enough to seek out a dead woman's cabin in the middle of nowhere." Maya thought of her mother lying unconscious in the hospital, of the medical bills mounting like storm clouds, of the phone calls from debt collectors that had driven her to seek refuge in this remote place. "My mother is dying." "I know. And you think you've lost everything." Cordelia's voice grew gentler. "But what if I told you that everything you need to save her is already inside you? What if I told you that your grandmother left you more than just an old cabin? I'd say you're talking in riddles." Cordelia smiled, and for the first time, her stern features showed warmth. "Then let me speak plainly. You found her journal, didn't you? Found the room below?" Maya nodded reluctantly. "Good. And you're ready to learn the truth about what your family really is." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Maya's mother stood frozen in the doorway of the hidden room, her face cycling through emotions Maya had never seen before. Terror, guilt, and something that looked almost like relief. "Mom?" Maya's voice came out smaller than she intended. "What is this place?" Sarah stepped down into the room with the careful movements of someone walking through a minefield. Her fingers traced the edge of the wooden table where Maya had found the photographs, and she let out a shaky breath. "I hoped I'd never have to see this again," Sarah whispered. "Your grandmother, she made me promise to forget, to pretend none of this existed." Maya held up one of the photographs, a young woman who looked remarkably like herself, standing beside a man in what appeared to be a laboratory setting. "But you knew about these pictures, about whatever my grandmother was involved in." "Involved in?" Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Maya, she wasn't just involved, she created it." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She sank into the chair, still clutching the photograph. Created what? Sarah moved to the filing cabinet, her hand hovering over the lock Maya had broken. Your grandmother wasn't just a research assistant at the pharmaceutical company. She was brilliant, too brilliant for her own good. And when she discovered what they were really doing with her work, she trailed off, opening the top drawer. What were they doing? Human experimentation, genetic modification. They were trying to create enhanced immune systems, accelerated healing, extended lifespans. Sarah pulled out a thick folder marked with red ink, but the side effects were catastrophic. Maya's throat went dry. Side effects? Cellular degeneration, organ failure, madness. Sarah's voice grew quieter with each word. The subjects would seem fine for months, even years, then their bodies would turn against them. The photograph in Maya's hands suddenly felt heavier. And Grandma Elena participated in this? She tried to stop it once she understood what was happening, but by then, it was too late. Sarah opened the folder, revealing pages of medical records and test results. She'd already administered the treatments to test subjects, including herself. Maya's blood turned to ice. Herself? She wanted to understand the effects firsthand, to find a way to reverse them. Sarah's hands shook as she flipped through the documents, but the company found out about her opposition. They came after her, threatened her family. So she disappeared, faked her death, and came here to continue her research in secret. That's impossible. Grandma Elena died when I was 5. I remember Mom crying at the funeral. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. That's what I told you, what I told everyone. But she didn't die, Maya. She lived here for 20 more years, trying to find a cure for what she'd unleashed. The room seemed to spin around Maya. Everything she thought she knew about her family, her grandmother, her own history, it was all a lie. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought it was over. When she really died 3 years ago, I thought the secrets could die with her. Sarah pulled out another document, this one with Maya's name at the top. But then you started showing symptoms. Maya's heart stopped. Symptoms? The faster healing, your immunity to illnesses that should have knocked you out for weeks, the way you barely seem to age. Sarah's voice cracked. I noticed it years ago but convinced myself I was imagining things, until you mentioned how quickly that cut on your hand healed last week. Maya stared at her hands, remembering the deep gash that had sealed itself within hours. She'd attributed it to good genetics, lucky timing. But now, you're saying I'm some kind of experiment? Not you directly, but the modifications your grandmother made to herself, they were passed down, genetic changes that affected her bloodline. Sarah sank into the other chair. Including you, the weight of revelation pressed down on Maya's chest. How long do I have? We don't know. The original subjects lasted different amounts of time. Some died within months, others lived for decades before the degeneration began. Maya stood abruptly, pacing the small space. There has to be something here, some research, some cure she was working on. Maya? No. She spun to face her mother. You said she spent 20 years trying to fix this. She must have found something. Sarah gestured helplessly at the room around them. This is all that's left. I've been through every file, every note. If she found a cure, she either hid it somewhere else or took the secret with her. Maya's gaze fell on the locked chest in the corner, the one she hadn't yet opened. Her grandmother had been paranoid, secretive. If there were answers to be found, they wouldn't be sitting out in plain sight. Then we keep looking, Maya said, moving toward the chest with renewed determination. Because I'm not going to die from some decades-old experiment without a fight. Maya's hands trembled as she lifted the oil lamp higher, its flickering light dancing across the photographs, scattered beneath the loose floorboard. Each image felt like a piece of a puzzle she'd never known existed, revealing faces that shared her eyes, her jawline, her stubborn chin. But it was the leather-bound journal beneath the photos that made her breath catch. The cover was worn smooth by countless hands, its pages yellowed with age. As she opened it, her grandmother's familiar handwriting emerged from the shadows. though the words were younger somehow, less weathered by time. October 15th, 1963. They're getting closer. I can feel them watching, waiting, the gifts that run through our bloodline. They want to understand them, to use them. But some things shouldn't be weaponized. Maya sank to her knees on the cold cellar floor, the journal trembling in her grip. Gifts? The strange moments throughout her life suddenly crystallized, the way she'd always known when her mother was lying, how she could sense danger before it arrived, the dreams that sometimes came true. She'd dismissed them as coincidence, intuition, nothing more. The experiment started when I was Maya's age, the next entry read, and Maya's blood turned to ice. They came for my mother first, convinced she was some kind of psychic weapon. When she disappeared, they turned to me. But I won't let them have my daughter. I won't let them have my granddaughter. The lamp nearly slipped from Maya's fingers. Her grandmother had known her name before she was even born, had written about her decades before her parents had even met. Footsteps creaked overhead, and Maya froze. The sound was deliberate, measured, not the random settling of an old house. Someone was inside the cabin. She extinguished the lamp, plunging herself into absolute darkness. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched the journal to her chest, listening to the careful footsteps move from room to room above. They knew the layout, avoiding the creaky boards she'd stumbled over earlier. Through the floorboards, she heard the scrape of furniture being moved, drawers being opened and closed with surgical precision. Professional, methodical. These weren't random burglars. They were searching for something specific. Maya fumbled for her phone, but the screen showed no signal bars. Of course, the remote location that had seemed like salvation now felt like a trap. The footsteps paused directly overhead, and Maya held her breath. Dust motes drifted down through the cracks as weight shifted above her hiding spot. Could they sense her somehow? Did they have the same abilities her family apparently possessed? The genetic markers skipped generations, another journal entry had mentioned. What they couldn't find in me might surface in Maya. If they discover her existence, if they learn what she might become. The thought chilled her more than the underground cold. Whatever her grandmother had been running from, it hadn't died with time. It had been waiting, patient and persistent, for the next generation to surface. A new sound made her stomach clench, the screech of metal against wood. They'd found the loose floorboard. Light pierced the darkness as someone lifted the board away, and Maya pressed herself against the far wall of the hidden space. Empty, a voice called out, male, professional, disappointed. Just some old photos and papers. Maya realized with a surge of relief that the space was deeper than it appeared from above. She'd crawled farther back than the light could reach, hidden in shadows that the searchers couldn't penetrate without coming down themselves. "Keep looking," another voice replied, this one female and coldly authoritative. The readings were strongest here. She has to have left something behind. Readings. The word sent ice through Maya's veins. What kind of readings? The board thudded back into place, sealing her in darkness again, but the footsteps didn't retreat. Instead, she heard the unmistakable sound of equipment being unpacked, electronic beeping, hushed conversations about genetic resonance and psychic imprinting. Maya forced herself to breathe slowly, quietly, as she felt along the walls of her underground prison. Her fingers found rough stone, old wood, and then something else. A narrow opening, barely wide enough for her body, leading deeper into the mountain. Her grandmother had been thorough. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was an escape route. As Maya gathered the journal and photos, stuffing them into her jacket, she heard one of the searchers say, "The readings are getting stronger. She's been here recently, very recently." The female voice responded with deadly calm. "Then she hasn't gone far. Activate the perimeter sensors and call in the tracking team. 60 years of hunting ends tonight." Maya didn't wait to hear more. She squeezed into the tunnel, crawling blindly into the mountain's depths, her grandmother's warnings echoing in her mind. Whatever legacy had been passed down through her bloodline, whatever gifts or curses ran in her DNA, the people above wouldn't stop until they possessed them, or until they possessed her. The tunnel stretched ahead into absolute darkness, and Maya crawled forward, carrying her family's deadly secrets into the unknown. The photograph trembled in Maya's hands as she stared at her grandmother's face, young, radiant, and unmistakably alive in 1987, 3 years after her supposed death. The implications crashed over her like ice water, each revelation more devastating than the last. If Grandmother Rose had faked her death, what else had she lied about, and why had she abandoned the family that mourned her for decades? Maya set the photograph aside and reached for the leather journal beneath it, its pages yellowed with age. Rose's handwriting filled the margins in tight, urgent script that spoke of desperation and fear. The first entry was dated 6 months before her alleged death. They're getting closer. The Foundation thinks they can control what we've awakened, but they don't understand the true nature of the bloodline. The experiments on the children must stop. I've seen what happens when the gift is forced rather than nurtured. Madness, violence, death. They're turning our blessing into a weapon. Maya's blood ran cold. The Foundation, the same organization mentioned in the medical files upstairs. She flipped through pages frantically, searching for more details about these experiments, about the bloodline Rose mentioned. Her own bloodline. The Ashford genetic markers appear in roughly 1 in every 10,000 births, but our family carries the pure strain. They've been harvesting our DNA for years, using it to create synthetic compounds that can temporarily grant the abilities to others. The side effects are catastrophic. I've documented 17 deaths in the past month alone. The journal slipped from Maya's numb fingers. 17 deaths, and somehow her family was at the center of it all. She thought of her father's sudden illness, the way it had progressed so rapidly that doctors couldn't explain it. Had they somehow gotten to him too? A sound from upstairs made her freeze, the distinctive creak of the front door opening. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she listened to slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the cabin floor. Someone was inside. She quickly gathered the photographs and journal, stuffing them into her jacket pocket before crouching low beside the hidden room's entrance. The footsteps moved methodically through the cabin, searching. Maya held her breath as they paused directly above her hiding spot. "Maya?" A woman's voice called out, cultured and calm. "I know you're here. Your car is in the driveway." Maya pressed herself against the cold earth wall, mind racing. The voice was unfamiliar, but there was something unsettling about its measured tone, like a predator attempting to sound non-threatening. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I work with the Ashford Foundation. I believe you've discovered some materials that belong to us." The Ashford Foundation. Maya's grandmother's journal had mentioned them as the enemy, the ones conducting the horrific experiments. If this woman was here, it meant they'd been watching, waiting for someone to find Rose's hiding place. "I'm not here to hurt you, Maya. In fact, I'm here to help. Your father's condition, we can treat it. But I need you to come out so we can talk." The mention of her father made Maya's resolve waver for a moment. But she remembered the journal's warnings about the Foundation's true nature, the deaths Rose had documented. This was a trap. The footsteps moved away from her position, heading toward the back of the cabin. Maya seized the opportunity, quietly climbing back up through the hidden entrance. She eased the floorboard back into place and crept toward the front door, staying low beneath the windows. "I understand you're frightened," Dr. Chen continued from somewhere in the back rooms. "Your grandmother filled your head with stories, didn't she? Made us out to be monsters." But Rose was unstable, Maya. The genetic gifts that run in your family, they come with a price. Without proper treatment, they lead to paranoia, delusions, and eventually complete mental breakdown. Maya reached the front door and slowly turned the handle. The doctor's words planted seeds of doubt despite her determination to escape. What if Rose had been mentally ill? What if the journal was the product of a diseased mind? But then she remembered the medical files upstairs, the cold clinical language describing children as test subjects. Whatever the truth about her grandmother's mental state, the Foundation's crimes were real. She slipped outside into the crisp mountain air and crept toward her car, keys already in her hand. Behind her, Dr. Chen's voice continued its persuasive monologue, growing more urgent as she likely realized her quarry was escaping. Maya reached her car and quietly opened the door, but as she slid into the driver's seat, a hand slammed against the passenger window. A man in a dark suit stood beside the car, his face cold and professional. Dr. Chen had brought backup. "Step out of the vehicle, please," he said through the glass, his other hand resting meaningfully on something beneath his jacket. Maya turned the key in the ignition and gunned the engine. She had Rose's evidence now, and whatever the cost, she would learn the truth about her family's deadly legacy. Maya's hands trembled as she held the leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and secrets. The flashlight cast dancing shadows across the hidden room's walls, making the symbols carved into the stone seem to writhe and breathe. She had been reading for what felt like hours, each entry more disturbing than the last. A grandmother, Elena, hadn't just been a recluse living in the mountains. She had been a guardian, protecting something that should have remained buried forever. The journal detailed decades of vigilance, of rituals performed under moonlight, of desperate attempts to contain what Elena called the family curse. Maya's phone buzzed against the wooden floor where she dropped it. 3 missed calls from her sister Rosie. The outside world felt impossibly distant now, separated by more than just miles of mountain wilderness. She was beginning to understand why Elena had cut all ties with the family, why she had chosen isolation over connection. The entries grew more frantic as Maya read deeper into the journal. Elena wrote of dreams that weren't dreams, of voices calling from beneath the earth, of a hunger that grew stronger with each passing generation. Maya's blood ran cold when she found her own name mentioned repeatedly in the later entries. "She carries it stronger than the others," one passage read. "The gift skipped her mother, but Maya will either master it or be consumed by it. The signs are already showing." "What signs?" Maya flipped through pages frantically, searching for answers. The flashlight beam wavered as her hands shook, casting erratic patterns across photographs tucked between the journal's pages. Pictures of women who looked disturbingly familiar. The same dark eyes, the same angular jawline that Maya saw in her own mirror each morning. But these women lived in different eras. Victorian dress, 1920s bob cuts, 1950s victory rolls, all bearing the unmistakable features of Maya's bloodline, all with the same haunted expression Elena had worn in the few photographs Maya remembered from childhood. A sound from above made her freeze. Footsteps on the cabin's wooden floors, too heavy to be the settling of old timber. Maya quickly extinguished the flashlight, plunging the hidden room into absolute darkness. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she listened, trying to distinguish between the cabin's natural creaks and genuine intrusion. The footsteps moved methodically from room to room. Someone was searching for something, or someone. Maya clutched the journal tighter, her grandmother's final words echoing in her mind from the last entry. "They know she's here. They can sense the awakening. Keep her away from the old places, the thin spaces where the veil grows weak." Too late for that warning. Maya was already deep in the thinnest space of all. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Maya held her breath, praying the loose floorboard that concealed the room's entrance wouldn't betray her location. But silence stretched too long, became too deliberate. Whoever was up there knew exactly where she was hiding. "Maya Castellanos." The voice that drifted down was cultured, patient, entirely too calm. "We know you're here. We know you've found your grandmother's sanctuary." Maya pressed herself against the stone wall, feeling the carved symbols rough against her shoulder blades. The journal's leather binding was slick with her perspiration. "Your grandmother was very skilled at hiding from us," the voice continued. "But she couldn't hide forever. And neither can you. The blood calls to blood, Maya. You feel it already, don't you? The dreams, the knowing things you shouldn't know, the way shadows move differently around you." Everything the voice described was true. Maya had experienced strange episodes her entire life, moments of clarity that felt like remembering the future, shadows that seemed to respond to her emotions, an inexplicable ability to find lost things. She had always dismissed these incidents as coincidence or imagination. "We can help you understand what you are," the voice offered. "What you're becoming. Your grandmother filled your head with fear, but we offer knowledge, power, the choice your bloodline was meant to embrace." A board creaked as the person moved, and Maya heard the distinct sound of the loose floorboard being pried up. Light spilled into her hiding place, but not the warm glow of electric bulbs. This light was cold, silver, and seemed to move with purpose. "There you are." Maya looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the unnatural light. The face was obscured, but she could sense something fundamentally wrong about the person's proportions, the way they held themselves, the stillness that seemed too complete for anything living. The journal in her hands grew warm, then hot. Pages began flipping themselves, settling on an entry Maya hadn't noticed before. Elena's handwriting was urgent, almost illegible. "When they find her, when there's nowhere left to run, remember the binding words. The choice must be made before the blood moon rises. 3 days, always 3 days." Maya looked up from the journal to find the figure descending into the hidden room, moving with fluid grace that defied gravity. The silver light emanated from their skin, pulsing with the rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't quite human. 3 days until what? Maya clutched the journal and searched desperately for another way out. The basement felt different now, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of revealed secrets. Maya stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate the chaos she'd created. Documents scattered across the floor, the overturned box, and there, still clutched in her trembling hand, the photograph that changed everything. Her grandmother's face stared back at her, but not as the frail woman Maya remembered from childhood visits. This Elena Vasquez was younger, confident, surrounded by men in expensive suits. The timestamp read 1987, and scrawled on the back in her grandmother's familiar handwriting, "The Meridian Group, last meeting before we scattered." A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, crossing the cabin's main room. Maya killed the flashlight instantly, plunging herself into absolute darkness. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the cold stone wall, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps moved methodically above her head, pausing at what she knew was the kitchen, then continuing toward the bedroom where she'd been sleeping. She heard the creak of the bedroom door opening, a long pause. Then the footsteps returned, faster now, searching. The loose floorboard. She'd been careless, hadn't replaced it properly when she'd discovered the hidden room. Whoever was up there would find the entrance within minutes. Moving by, feel alone, Maya began gathering the scattered documents, her hands shaking as she tried to work silently. The photograph went into her jacket pocket, along with several other papers that felt important, bank records, what felt like legal documents, anything she could grab in the dark. Above her, the footsteps had stopped. She heard the sound of wood being pried up. Light suddenly flooded the basement as someone opened the trapdoor. Maya pressed herself deeper into the shadows behind the furnace, holding her breath as a powerful flashlight beam swept the room. "I know you're down there, Maya." The voice was calm, almost gentle, male, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Your car's outside, the bed's still warm. Come up, we need to talk." Maya closed her eyes, fighting panic. How did he know her name? How had he found her here? "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," the man continued, his light still searching the basement. "Very careful, very clever, but not careful enough in the end." The beam passed inches from her hiding spot. Maya could hear him descending the stairs now, his movements confident despite the narrow space. She had maybe 30 seconds before he found her. "She left you quite a legacy down here, didn't she? Bank accounts, safe deposit box numbers, names and addresses. The whole network she spent 20 years building after she disappeared." He knew about the documents, which meant he'd been watching, waiting for someone to find this place, waiting for her. The Meridian Group thought they'd eliminated all traces of their activities when they disbanded in the 80s, thought everyone who could connect them to the mining disaster, the cover-up, the payoffs, thought they were all dead or bought off. Maya's blood turned to ice. The mining disaster. She remembered now, fragments of news stories from her childhood, hushed conversations between her parents that stopped whenever she entered the room. A silver mine that collapsed in 1986, killing dozens of workers. Accusations of safety violations, environmental contamination. Families paid to stay silent. But Elena was always the smart one. She took their money and disappeared, but she kept collecting evidence. Insurance policy, she called it. And now that evidence belongs to you. The flashlight beam swung toward the furnace. Maya held her breath, pressing herself against the wall, but there was nowhere left to hide. There you are. The man was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 40, with prematurely grey hair and kind eyes that didn't match the gun in his hand. He kept the weapon lowered, non-threatening, but the message was clear. Who are you? Maya's voice came out as a whisper. Someone who's been looking for your grandmother's insurance policy for a very long time. He gestured toward the stairs with his free hand. Come on, we have a lot to discuss and very little time. Maya clutched the documents in her jacket pocket as she stood slowly, her legs unsteady. What happened to her? To my grandmother? The man's expression softened slightly. Elena died peacefully, if that's what you're wondering. Natural causes. But her death started a clock ticking, and that clock's almost run out. As they climbed the stairs together, Maya's mind raced. The mining disaster, the Meridian Group, her grandmother's 20-year disappearance, pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. But one thing was becoming terrifyingly clear. Whatever Elena had been hiding in that basement, it was worth killing for. And now, it belonged to her. The photograph trembled in Maya's hands as she stared at the faces looking back at her, faces that belonged to people she'd been told were dead. Her grandmother stood in the center, decades younger but unmistakably Eleanor, surrounded by men and women Maya didn't recognize. What made her blood run cold was the date scrawled on the back, 3 years after Eleanor's supposed death. "This doesn't make sense," Maya whispered, sinking onto the dusty wooden crate that served as her makeshift chair in the hidden room. She'd been down here for hours, methodically going through every box, every file, every scrap of paper that might explain the web of lies her family had been living. The manila folders spread across the floor told a story that grew more disturbing with each revelation. Birth certificates with altered dates, death certificates that had clearly been forged, and bank statements, dozens of them, showing regular deposits into accounts under names she'd never heard but suspected were aliases. Maya picked up another photograph, this one showing Eleanor with a man whose face had been carefully scratched out with black ink. The woman next to him, however, was clearly visible, and Maya's heart stopped. She knew that face. She'd seen it in her mother's photo albums, labeled as Aunt Catherine, died in car accident 1987. Except this photo was dated 1995. A sound from upstairs made Maya freeze, footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the cabin's main room. She held her breath, straining to listen. The footsteps paused directly above the hidden room. Maya quickly gathered the most important documents, stuffing them into her jacket. She reached for the photographs, but another sound made her pause, the distinctive creak of the loose floorboard near the kitchen. Someone was moving toward the spot where the entrance to this room was concealed. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know you're there. Come up slowly." Maya's hands shook as she typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who knew your grandmother. Someone who's been waiting for you to find this place." Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to wait it out. But the room had no other exit, and whoever was upstairs clearly knew about its existence. Maya looked around desperately, spotting a metal box she hadn't yet opened. Inside, she found a loaded pistol wrapped in an oiled cloth, along with a note in Eleanor's handwriting. Trust no one who claims to know the truth about our family. The real truth is worse than any lie. The footsteps moved again, and Maya heard the scrape of furniture being shifted. They were looking for the entrance. She climbed the narrow stairs, pistol tucked into her waistband, the crucial documents pressed against her chest. At the top, she paused with her hand on the concealed latch. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open and emerged into the cabin's main room. A woman stood by the window, her back turned. She was older, perhaps 60, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. When she turned, Maya gasped. It was the woman from the photograph, Aunt Catherine, who was supposed to be dead. "Hello, Maya," the woman said, her voice calm and measured. "You look just like Eleanor did at your age. You're supposed to be dead," Maya managed, keeping her hand close to the hidden weapon. Catherine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Death is a useful fiction in our family, as I'm sure you're beginning to understand." She gestured to the papers Maya clutched. "Found some interesting reading material, did you? What is this? What happened to my grandmother? To my family?" "Your family, dear child, has never been what you thought it was." Catherine moved closer, and Maya noticed the way she favored her left leg, as if from an old injury. Eleanor thought she could break free, start over with a clean slate. She thought she could protect you and your mother by faking her death and disappearing. "Protect us from what?" "From the business we're in, from the people we work for, from the fact that your bloodline comes with obligations that can't be simply walked away from." Maya's mind raced. What business? What obligation? Catherine reached into her coat, and Maya tensed, but the older woman only pulled out a cigarette. "Your grandmother never told you about the family trade, did she? About what we've been doing for generations?" She lit the cigarette, taking a long drag. "We find people who don't want to be found. We make problems disappear. And sometimes, when necessary, we make people disappear too." The weight of the pistol against Maya's back felt both comforting and terrifying. "You're talking about—" "Murder, yes, among other services. Very specialized, very discreet, very profitable." Catherine's eyes glittered. "And now that Eleanor's gone, really gone this time, the responsibility falls to the next generation." Maya backed toward the door. "I won't. I'm not part of this." "Oh, my dear," Catherine said, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under her heel. "You've been part of this since the day you were born. The question now is whether you'll cooperate willingly, or whether we'll have to convince you." The trembling in Maya's hands had nothing to do with the mountain cold as she descended into the hidden room once more. The revelations from the journal entries had shattered her understanding of everything, but she needed answers that only the remaining documents could provide. Elena's words echoed in her mind. The Blackwood family had been guardians of something far more dangerous than she'd initially comprehended. She moved methodically through the remaining boxes, her flashlight casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. In the third container, beneath layers of correspondence and legal documents, she found what appeared to be a ledger bound in cracked leather. The pages were filled with her grandmother's careful handwriting, but these weren't personal reflections. They were records. Each entry contained a date, a name, and a location. As Maya scanned the pages, a pattern emerged that made her stomach clench. The names were familiar, some from old newspaper clippings she'd found upstairs, others from stories her mother had told her about people who'd disappeared in the mountains over the decades, people who'd been searching for something. According to Elena's records, they'd found it. The ledger detailed each encounter with what Elena called seekers. Some had come looking for treasure, others for archaeological artifacts, but all had somehow learned fragments of the truth about what lay hidden in these mountains. Elena had intercepted them, one by one, using methods that became increasingly desperate as the years passed. Maya's blood ran cold as she read an entry from 15 years ago. A young archaeologist named David Chen had arrived asking about indigenous burial sites with unusual mineral properties. Elena's note was brief, gave him false coordinates, redirected to the eastern slope, weather moving in. "He won't survive the storm." The next entry, dated 3 days later, simply read, "Problem solved." She flipped through more pages, finding similar encounters: a geology student in 2003, a treasure hunter in 1998, a documentary filmmaker in 2007. Each entry ended with Elena's cold assessment of how she'd eliminated the threat to the family's secret. But it was the final set of entries that made Maya's hands shake so violently she nearly dropped the ledger. Her own mother's name appeared repeatedly over the past 2 years, along with increasingly frantic notes about Sarah's determination to reconnect with the family and bring Maya to visit the mountains. "Sarah knows something," Elena had written. "Her questions about the old stories are too specific. She's been researching. If she brings Maya here, if they start looking around the property." The entry was dated just 3 weeks before her grandmother's death. Maya slammed the ledger shut and scrambled up the ladder, her mind reeling. She burst into the main cabin and immediately called her mother, pacing frantically as the phone rang. "Maya? Honey, what's wrong? You sound—" "Mom, you need to tell me the truth. About grandmother. About why you really wanted me to come here." The silence stretched so long that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You found the room. What do you know?" Maya demanded. "The journal, the ledger, all those people who died. What aren't you telling me?" Her mother's ragged breathing was audible through the phone. "I've been trying to piece it together for years. The stories my mother told me as a child, they weren't just folk tales. There's something in those mountains. Something our family has been protecting or hiding. I could never tell which. And you sent me here knowing that? I thought with Elena gone, you could finally learn the truth safely. I thought the danger died with her." Sarah's voice cracked. "But Maya, you need to listen to me very carefully. If what I suspect is true, if that room contains what I think it does, you're not the only one who's going to be looking for it." "What do you mean?" Elena spent decades covering up the evidence, eliminating threats. But she wasn't working alone, and she wasn't the only one who knew. "There are others, Maya, people who've been waiting for the right opportunity." As if summoned by her mother's words, Maya heard the distant sound of engines echoing off the mountain slopes. Multiple vehicles moving up the winding access road that was supposed to be impassable this time of year. She moved to the window and peered through the darkness. 3 sets of headlights were winding their way up the mountainside, still miles away but closing steadily. "Mom, someone's coming." "Hide the evidence, hide everything." And Maya, Sarah's voice took on an urgency that made Maya's chest tighten. "Whatever you do, don't let them find what's in that room. If they get their hands on it, our family won't be the only one in danger." The line went dead. Outside, the headlights continued their inexorable climb toward the cabin, and Maya realized that her grandmother's death hadn't ended anything. It had simply removed the only barrier between the world and whatever secret the Blackwood family had been dying to protect. The morning light filtered through the cabin's dusty windows as Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, her grandmother's journal open across her lap. The hidden room below had yielded more than just documents. It had shattered every assumption she'd held about her family's past. Her fingers traced the faded ink of Elena's careful handwriting, each word a revelation that made her stomach clench with equal parts dread and understanding. The journal entries from 1962 painted a picture of a young woman desperate to escape something far more sinister than Maya had imagined. Elena hadn't simply run away from an arranged marriage as family law suggested. She'd fled from her own father's involvement in a network of corrupt officials who'd been systematically stealing from federal land preservation funds, money meant to protect the very mountains where Maya now sat. "The cabin was never meant to be permanent," Elena had written. "But Thomas says we're safer here than anywhere else. The federal agents are closing in, and Papa knows I have the ledgers. He'll come for me eventually." Maya's phone buzzed against the wooden floor. Detective Morrison's name appeared on the cracked screen, and her heart hammered as she answered. "Maya, where are you? We've been trying to reach you since yesterday. I'm at my grandmother's cabin." "Why? What's happened?" There's been a development in your mother's case. We found something in her hotel room that changes everything. Can you get back to town?" Maya glanced at the documents spread around her like fallen leaves. "What kind of development?" "The kind that suggests your mother wasn't just researching your family history. She was investigating something current, something dangerous." The phone nearly slipped from Maya's grip. She thought of her mother's nervous energy in the weeks before her disappearance, the hushed phone calls that stopped whenever Maya entered the room, the way Sarah had insisted on meeting at the cabin, despite Maya's protests. "Detective, I think I know what she was investigating." A pause. "What do you mean?" Maya picked up one of the more recent documents from the hidden room, a deed transfer from just 5 years ago. "My grandmother didn't just hide old family secrets down here. She was still collecting evidence right up until she died. Evidence of ongoing fraud involving the same network her father was part of 60 years ago. Maya, listen to me carefully. Do not stay at that cabin. Pack whatever you have and leave now." "Why? What aren't you telling me?" "Because 3 hours ago we arrested Vincent Carrera for embezzling federal funds through his construction company. The same Vincent Carrera whose family has owned property adjacent to your grandmother's land for generations. And according to the evidence your mother apparently gathered, that land was never legally theirs to begin with." The journal slipped from Maya's lap as the implication hit her. Vincent Carrera, the man who'd been pressuring her to sell the cabin since Elena's funeral, the man who'd seemed far too interested in when she might clear out her grandmother's belongings. "He knows about the hidden room," Maya whispered. "What hidden room?" A sound outside made Maya freeze, the distant rumble of an engine winding up the mountain road. She crept to the window and peered through the grime-covered glass. A black SUV was climbing toward the cabin, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. "Detective, someone's coming up the road. Get out of there now. Take the back trail if you have to, but do not let them corner you in that cabin." Maya was already moving, stuffing documents into her backpack with trembling hands. She could hear the engine getting closer, gravel crunching under heavy tires. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of the SUV's driver, a man she didn't recognize, but whose hard expression told her everything she needed to know about his intentions. "The phone's cutting out." Morrison's voice crackled through static. "Maya, can you hear me?" She ended the call and switched the phone to silent, her mind racing through Elena's detailed map of the mountain trails. There was a back route that led down to the forestry road, but it meant leaving through the rear window and hoping she could reach the tree line before they spotted her. The SUV's engine cut off. Car doors slammed. Maya shouldered her backpack and moved toward the back bedroom, her grandmother's journal clutched against her chest. As she struggled with the warped window frame, she heard heavy footsteps on the front porch, then the sharp crack of splintering wood. They weren't bothering to knock. The window finally gave way, and Maya squeezed through into the crisp mountain air. Behind her, she heard voices, at least 2 men, moving through the cabin with the efficiency of people who'd been here before. One of them called out something about checking the basement. Maya ran for the trees, Elena's words echoing in her mind. "Some secrets are worth dying for. Others are worth living for. The trick is knowing which is which." The flashlight beam trembled in Maya's grip as she descended the narrow wooden steps into the hidden chamber for what felt like the 100th time. The musty air carried whispers of decades-old secrets, and tonight she was determined to uncover the final piece of the puzzle that had consumed her life for the past 3 weeks. Behind her, Detective Morgan's footsteps creaked against the aged planks. She'd finally convinced him to come after showing him the photographs, the journal entries, and the DNA results that had arrived that morning. The results that changed everything. "You're certain about this?" Morgan's voice carried a weight of disbelief that Maya understood completely. She'd felt the same way when the truth first began revealing itself through her grandmother's carefully hidden documentation. "The lab confirmed it twice," Maya said, sweeping the light across the far wall where a metal filing cabinet stood like a sentinel guarding the family's darkest truths. "Eleanor Hartwell wasn't just my grandmother's friend, she was her sister." The implications hung heavy in the stale air. Eleanor Hartwell, the woman who disappeared 47 years ago, whose case had haunted the local police department and spawned countless theories. The same woman whose distinctive jewelry Maya had found wrapped in cloth at the bottom of an old trunk just days ago. Maya pulled open the cabinet's bottom drawer, her movements precise despite her racing heart. Inside, nestled between faded manila folders, lay a leather-bound ledger she'd discovered yesterday. Its pages contained dates, times, and locations, written in her grandmother's meticulous handwriting, a record that painted a picture no one could have imagined. "Look at this entry," Maya said, opening to a page marked with a red ribbon. August 15th, 1976. "It becoming more unstable. Threatens to expose the family business. Father says she's become a liability." Morgan leaned closer, his skepticism giving way to professional interest. "What family business?" Maya's throat tightened as she flipped through several more pages, each entry more damning than the last. "Money laundering. Drug running. My great-grandfather used this cabin as a way station for smuggling operations coming down from Canada. Eleanor wanted out, but she knew too much." The detective's expression hardened as Maya continued reading aloud from the journal. The entries detailed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of local government, involving judges, police officials, and prominent businessmen, many of whose families still held positions of power in the community. "Your grandmother documented all of this?" Morgan asked, photographing the pages with his phone. "She was protecting herself," Maya said, understanding flooding through her as the pieces finally connected. "Look at this. September 3rd, 1976. Father ordered me to handle situation permanently. Cannot bring myself to harm my own sister. Arranged for her disappearance instead. Eleanor now living under assumed identity in Portland. Family believes her dead. This secret dies with me." The revelation sent a chill through the underground chamber. Maya's grandmother hadn't been complicit in murder. She'd been saving her sister's life while allowing everyone to believe Eleanor was dead. But the deception had come at a cost that rippled through generations. Morgan's radio crackled to life, breaking the heavy silence. "Detective Morgan, we've got movement at the Blackwood property. 3 vehicles approaching from the main road." Maya's blood ran cold. The Blackwoods, one of the families mentioned repeatedly in the journal entries, their patriarch having been her great-grandfather's primary partner in the smuggling operation. If they were coming here, it meant someone had discovered her investigation. "We need to leave." "Now," Morgan said, but Maya was already moving toward another section of the chamber she'd only partially explored. "Wait, there's something else." She pulled away a tarp covering what appeared to be a second entrance, this one leading to a tunnel that disappeared into darkness. The journal mentions an escape route. "If the Blackwoods are here, they're not coming for a friendly conversation." The sound of car doors slamming echoed faintly through the cabin's floorboards above them. Heavy footsteps crossed the main room, and Maya could hear muffled voices discussing the best way to search the property. "They know about the hidden room," she whispered, recognizing the calculating tone in the voices above, the same cold pragmatism that had characterized her great-grandfather's journal entries about eliminating problems. Morgan drew his weapon, positioning himself near the base of the stairs. "Take the tunnel. I'll hold them here and call for backup." But Maya hesitated, clutching the journal that contained enough evidence to expose a corruption network spanning nearly 5 decades. These weren't just historical crimes. The current generation of conspirators had clearly inherited both the family businesses and the willingness to protect them through violence. As footsteps approached the area directly above the hidden entrance, Maya made a decision that would determine not only her survival, but whether justice would finally reach those who'd believed themselves untouchable for far too long. The tunnel beckoned, dark and uncertain, but it represented something her grandmother had never had, a chance to escape while carrying the truth to light. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed felt more ominous than the howling wind. Maya stood in the hidden room, her grandmother's journal clutched against her chest, while the weight of 3 generations of secrets pressed down on her shoulders. The photographs scattered across the floor told a story she was still struggling to accept. Her family wasn't just connected to the Blackwood Mining Company disaster of 1952, they were responsible for it. Above them, footsteps creaked across the cabin floor, heavy boots, deliberate and searching. Maya's blood turned to ice as she recognized the sound of multiple people moving through her grandmother's home. "They found us," David whispered, his face pale in the lantern light. Elena pressed her finger to her lips, then pointed toward the far corner of the hidden room where Maya had first discovered the loose stone. "There's another way out," she mouthed silently. Maya's mind raced as the footsteps grew closer to the kitchen area where they'd left the trapdoor partially concealed. She thought of her grandmother's final words, scrawled in shaking handwriting on the journal's last page. "The truth must survive, even if we don't—" Working quickly and silently, Maya gathered the most crucial documents while Elena helped David toward the corner passage. His injured leg made every movement painful, but fear drove them forward. The photographs of the mine's true structural reports, the correspondence between her great-grandfather and Blackwood executives, the evidence of the cover-up that had cost 43 lives. It all went into the waterproof bag her grandmother had left for this exact purpose. The sound of splintering wood echoed from above. Someone had kicked in the front door. "Maya Chen!" a voice called out, deep, authoritative, and coldly familiar. It was the same man who had confronted her at the mining company offices 3 days ago. "We know you're here. We just want to talk." Elena's bitter laugh was barely audible. 40 years they've been saying they just want to talk," she whispered as she worked to pry loose the stone that would reveal their escape route. Maya's hands trembled as she rolled up the mine's original blueprints, the ones that showed the exact location of the unstable pocket her great-grandfather had discovered and chosen to hide. The same pocket that had collapsed, trapping those workers in a tomb of corporate greed and family shame. The stone shifted, revealing a narrow tunnel that seemed to lead deeper into the mountain. Elena went first, followed by David, who grimaced with each movement. Maya took one last look around the hidden room that had sheltered her family's secrets for decades, then squeezed into the passage behind them. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person, carved from living rock and supported by ancient timbers that groaned under the mountain's weight. Maya's lantern cast dancing shadows on the walls as they crawled forward, the sound of their breathing amplified in the confined space. Behind them, muffled voices grew louder. Someone had found the trapdoor. "How far does this go?" Maya asked Elena, who was navigating the passage with the confidence of someone who had used it before. "To the old mine entrance," Elena replied. "Your grandmother and I, we prepared for this day. She always knew they'd come eventually." David's labored breathing filled the tunnel as they pressed forward. "The mine where it happened?" Elena's voice carried a weight of old grief. "Where your great-grandfather condemned those men to die, yes, but also where he hid the evidence that could finally give their families justice." The tunnel began to slope upward, and Maya could feel a subtle change in the air, fresher, carrying the scent of pine and snow. They were getting close to the exit, but with each foot they traveled, Maya felt the magnitude of her inheritance settling more heavily upon her. She wasn't just carrying documents and photographs. She was carrying the power to destroy the Blackwood Mining Company, to expose a 70-year-old cover-up, to finally bring justice to families who had never learned the truth about how their loved ones died. But she was also carrying the knowledge that doing so would expose her great-grandfather as a willing participant in corporate murder. "There," Elena whispered, pointing ahead to where the tunnel opened into a larger space. Natural light filtered down from above, revealing the entrance to the abandoned mine. As they emerged from the tunnel, Maya realized they stood at the epicenter of everything. This was ground zero, the place where 43 men had died because her family had chosen money over human lives, the place where her grandmother had spent decades planning for this moment of reckoning. David leaned heavily against a support beam, his face drawn with pain and exhaustion. "What now?" Maya looked at the evidence in her hands, then at Elena's expectant face, then at the mine entrance where so many lives had been lost. The choice before her was simple in its complexity: destroy her family's name to save her family's soul, or let the dead remain buried with their secrets. The sound of distant voices echoed from the tunnel behind them. Their pursuers had found the passage. The photographs scattered across the cabin floor like fallen leaves, each one a fragment of a truth Maya had never imagined. Her grandmother's face stared back at her from dozens of images, young, defiant, beautiful, but it was the man beside her in the pictures that made Maya's blood turn to ice. Detective Carson's grandfather. The same piercing eyes, the same sharp jawline she'd seen in the old newspaper clipping tucked behind Carson's visor. But here he wasn't wearing a badge. Here he wore the black uniform of the organization that had hunted her family for generations. "The Order of the Silver Pine," Maya whispered, reading the insignia visible in several photographs. Her fingers trembled as she lifted one image. Her grandmother Elena, barely 18, standing beside three men in matching uniforms. One of them had his arm around her waist. One of them was unmistakably a Carson. The basement door creaked above her, and Maya's heart lurched. She'd been so absorbed in the photographs that she'd lost track of time. Footsteps crossed the cabin floor, too heavy to be her mother's. Maya gathered the photographs with desperate speed, shoving them into the leather satchel she'd found hidden in the wall cavity. The footsteps paused directly overhead, and she heard the subtle scrape of someone moving furniture. They were looking for the entrance to the hidden room. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Carson knows about the cabin. They're coming. Get out now." But it was too late. The footsteps moved toward the loose floorboard, and Maya heard the familiar groan of wood giving way. She grabbed the journal she'd been reading and pressed herself against the far wall of the hidden chamber, searching desperately for another way out. Light flooded the space as the concealed door opened fully. Detective Carson's silhouette filled the opening, his service weapon drawn but lowered. Behind him, Maya could see two other figures, men she didn't recognize. "Maya Chen." Carson's voice was different now, stripped of the false concern he'd shown at the hospital. "Come out slowly. We need to talk." "Like you talked to my grandmother?" Maya clutched the satchel against her chest. "Like your grandfather talked to her?" Carson's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "So you found them, the photographs." He holstered his weapon and dropped down into the hidden room with practiced ease. "That makes this easier, actually. You've been here before. Many times." Elena and I had an understanding in her final years. Carson moved closer, and Maya saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not malice, but exhaustion. "She knew the truth about what happened to your family, about what my grandfather did." "Then why?" "Because the order isn't gone, Maya. It evolved, adapted. What started as a handful of mountain families protecting their secrets became something else entirely when the outside world started encroaching." Carson gestured to the photographs scattered on the ground. "Your grandmother didn't just survive their persecution. She infiltrated them, learned their methods, their weaknesses." Maya's mind raced, trying to reconcile this revelation with everything she'd discovered. The journal entries about the experiments, the bloodline research. Elena was feeding them false information for decades, making them chase ghosts while she documented everything, every member, every operation, every crime. Carson's voice dropped to a whisper. "She was building a case, Maya, one that would destroy them completely. And you're what, carrying on her work?" "I'm trying to finish it." Carson pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "But they figured out what she was doing. They know about you, about your mother, about what Elena left behind. And they're coming tonight to clean up loose ends." The sound of vehicles approaching the cabin echoed from above, engines growling up the mountain road. Carson cursed and moved to the ladder leading back to the cabin. "There's another way out," Maya said suddenly, remembering something from her grandmother's journal. Elena wrote about a tunnel that connects to the old mine shaft. Carson spun around. "Where?" Maya moved to the far corner of the hidden room, running her hands along the stone wall until she found the section that felt different. newer concrete covering what must have been an opening. Here, but it's been sealed. Stand back. Carson pulled out a multi-tool and began chipping at the concrete. If Elena sealed this recently, it won't be reinforced. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from above, followed by voices, calm, professional, deadly. Maya recognized the tone from every crime show she'd ever watched, but this wasn't television. These were the people who had murdered her family members for generations, and now they were 20 feet above her head. The concrete gave way under Carson's assault, revealing a dark opening just large enough to crawl through. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of earth and decades-old secrets. "Go," Carson whispered, but Maya hesitated. "How do I know I can trust you?" Carson handed her his service weapon. "Because, Maya Chen, you're holding the evidence that will either vindicate my family's legacy or destroy it forever. And right now, keeping you alive is the only way I'll ever know which one it is." The dawn light filtered through the cabin's dusty windows as Maya knelt beside the hidden room one final time. The wooden box lay open before her, its contents now making perfect sense in the cruel morning clarity. The photographs, the letters, the land deeds, they painted a picture of a family built on lies, but also on an unshakable determination to protect what mattered most. Her grandmother hadn't been a monster. She'd been a survivor. The sound of car engines approaching made Maya's heart skip. Through the window, she could see two black SUVs winding up the mountain road, their windows tinted dark against the rising sun. Behind them came a familiar sedan, her father's car. Maya quickly gathered the most crucial documents, the ones that proved the Clearwater Corporation had been systematically poisoning the watershed for decades while bribing officials to look the other way. Her grandmother had documented everything, every payoff, every cover-up, every death that could be traced back to their criminal negligence. It was enough to bring down the entire organization. The engines cut off outside, car doors slammed with military precision. Maya descended into the hidden room, pulling the loose floorboard back into place above her head just as heavy footsteps crossed the cabin's threshold. She pressed herself against the earthen wall, clutching the documents to her chest, and held her breath. "She's been here," a gruff voice announced. "Coffee's still warm. Fan out. Check every room, every closet, every loose board." This voice she recognized, Thomas Clearwater himself, the man whose corporation had killed her mother, whose money had bought her father's silence, whose threats had driven her to this remote mountainside in the first place. Above her head, boots stomped across the floorboards. Furniture scraped against wood as they searched. Something glass shattered, probably her grandmother's teacup, the one Maya had used for her morning coffee while reading the final letter. That letter had changed everything. In her grandmother's careful handwriting, Maya had learned the truth about her mother's cancer, about the contaminated well water, about the settlement money that had bought their house and her father's complicity. But more importantly, she'd learned about the insurance policy her grandmother had taken out, not on her life, but on her secrets. "Sir, we've got a problem." A younger voice, nervous. "There's another car coming up the road." Maya heard movement toward the windows, a pause, then Thomas Clearwater's voice, tight with anger. "Who the hell called the media?" Through a crack in the floorboards, Maya could see slivers of the room above. 3 men in dark suits, all armed, all looking increasingly agitated. The sound of more vehicles approaching grew louder, not just one car but several. Her grandmother's final gift hadn't just been the evidence. It had been the network of people who would know to come looking if Maya didn't check in by dawn. Investigative journalists, federal agents, environmental activists, all of them armed with copies of the documents Maya now held. "We need to go," one of the men urged. "If those are feds, we're not leaving without those documents," Clearwater snarled. "Tear this place apart if you have to." Maya closed her eyes as the destruction began in earnest. They ripped up floorboards, punched holes in walls, overturned her grandmother's simple furniture, but they were looking in all the wrong places, and Maya realized her grandmother had planned for this too. The hidden room was positioned directly under the stone fireplace, the one place they couldn't tear up without bringing down half the cabin. Voices outside grew closer. Maya heard her name being called, and her heart leaped when she recognized the voice of Sarah Martinez, the investigative reporter who had been trying to expose Clearwater Corporation for years. "Time to go," Clearwater ordered his men. "Burn it down." "Sir, there are too many witnesses now." "I said burn it down." Maya heard the splash of liquid, gasoline, and smelled the fumes immediately. She pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from coughing as the acrid smell filled her hiding space. Above, she heard the scratch of a match. But before the fire could take hold, new voices burst into the cabin. "FBI, drop your weapons!" The next few minutes were chaos. Shouting, running footsteps, the sound of handcuffs clicking into place. Maya waited until the voices became calmer, more organized, before she finally pushed up the loose floorboard and emerged from her hiding place like a revelation. Sarah Martinez was the first to see her, eyes widening in amazement as Maya climbed out of what appeared to be solid ground. "Maya, my God, are you—" "I'm fine," Maya said, standing and brushing dirt from her clothes. She held up the documents, her grandmother's careful handwriting visible on the top page. "And I have everything we need." Through the cabin windows, she could see Thomas Clearwater being led away in handcuffs, his empire finally crumbling under the weight of an old woman's meticulous record-keeping and a granddaughter's courage to see justice done. The bloodline would continue, but this time built on truth instead of silence.